My name is Tommy Shepherd. I'm the Member of Parliament for Edinburgh East, one of the SNP representatives in the House of Commons, and I'm not sure if I'm still Vice Chair of the All Party Group, Joe, but I think I may be. And I've been asked to chair this meeting today. And apologies from a range of colleagues who actually I can see in another screen are busy haranguing the Secretary of State on the very question that we're discussing right now. It's unfortunate, as obvious that the parliamentary timetable can compromise some events that are organised like this. But it's useful that we're recording this and we'll be able to get the three contributions and the questions down on record, and then we can make those available to people who aren't able to be here in person today. So thank you very much for those that have made it along. We have three speakers. And I'm going to introduce them each in turn. They will speak for 7 to 10 minutes each, and then the second half of the meeting will be for questions and answers. And if you have a question whilst you're listening to people, you could always flag it up in the chat function on the Zoom. Once I've introduced the three speakers, I myself will have to switch off my camera, and I'll hand over to Joe to take the Q&A. The focus of today's meeting, with so much going on in the West Bank and in Gaza, is on the particular question of the treatment of prisoners by the Israeli authorities. Many of us have been aware that for a very long time now there have been concerns about the treatment and the very harsh treatment of people held in detention and in prison by the Israelis, and the use of imprisonment and detention to act as an act of suppressing Palestinian advocacy and Palestinian resistance. But clearly, since the 7th of October, these questions have been turbocharged, and we now have incidents that were once being reported on an infrequent basis are now pretty much the norm and the routine. And it's that we're going to explore today with people who have got first-hand knowledge of the situation. So with no further ado, let's head on to the speakers. The first speaker is Sahar Francis. Welcome, Sahar. She is the General Director of Addameer, Prisoner Support and Human Rights Association. And with a background in law, Sahar has dedicated years to advancing human rights amidst the challenges posed by the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories. And she particularly focuses on the welfare of Palestinian detainees and prisoners. Sahar, please bring us up to date with the situation as you see it.
Good afternoon, and thanks a lot for having this brief. Actually, it's not a new strategy that the Israeli occupation immediately when there's any emergency or when they declare emergency situation, they would use the arrest and detention as the main tool to oppress and to control the Palestinian people in all the places where the Palestinian people live in historic Palestine, inside the state, in the occupied territories, including East Jerusalem. And actually, since the 7th of October, they are launching mass arrest campaigns on daily basis. They immediately, of course, declared emergency inside the prisons, which reflected as well on the conditions of the prisoners. So in total, from the 7th of October till today, they arrested more than 7,800 people. Already on the 6th of October, we had 5,200 people in detention. The total number currently is over 9,000 Palestinian prisoners, and this is not including those from Gaza that they were arrested in the 7th and after the 7th of October. All these Palestinian prisoners actually are held in prisons inside, mostly inside the state. Just Ofer as a prison is located in the occupied territories near Ramallah. Currently, there's more than 200 children under 18 in detention. and around 64 females from the West Bank and 4 women that we are aware about in the Moon prison. And there's more than 3,558 administrative detainees. This is the highest number since the beginning of the occupation. And you probably know that the use of administrative detention is very essential in this system of oppression, because they don't need to present any charges or any clear evidences to the court. The administrative detention is based on secret information. It's very easy to issue hundreds of orders in very short period. And this explains why they are using in such a widespread manner the administrative detention even against children. It's for the first time that we have more than 40 children under administrative detention. It attacks students, political activists, women, men. Everyone could be subjected for administrative detention. Journalists, human rights defenders. We have several cases of human rights defenders working in international organizations. The latest case, a colleague from the GIZ, the German organization, that she was arrested last week and sent for 3 months under administrative detention. Of course, the main claim currently is the threat to the security. There were also an increase in the use of the criminal procedures according to the military orders, of course, around incitement, and it's tackling everyone over the social media, like posting on Facebook or Twitter or in any social media platform, inciting any support or solidarity with Gaza would be considered as a support for terrorism, and you would be charged with incitement and supporting terrorist organization. And also immediately inside of course, I should highlight that accompanying the arrest, the mass arrest, there's lots of use of excessive force, lots of violence, beatings, attacks against not just the detainee himself, but in these raids to the houses, usually after midnight, they attack the whole family member. There's a use of human shields against some of the family members where they cannot find the detainee himself. They will take the mother or the father as a replacement till the person surrender himself. They, in the time of the transfer from the houses or the streets or the checkpoints to the detention facility, usually the detainees report lots of harassment and attack by using weapons or wooden sticks or even the legs and hands of the soldiers. They beat them a lot. When they arrive to the prisons, the conditions in the prisons are so difficult. It's really like I'm practicing for more than 27 years in supporting prisoners. The conditions inside the prisons, I've never reported or documented such horrible conditions in all of the prisons since the 7th of October. They stopped respecting the decision of the Israeli High Court about the space. So now it's very crowded inside the prisons. There's people sleeping on the ground. In each room that used to host 6, now they have 12 or 14 people in all of the sections. And they immediately canceled all the family visits, including the Red Cross visits. They restricted the lawyers' visits for the first couple of weeks. They cut electricity, water, food. They search their rooms several times a day, and this is the moment when there's physical attacks against the prisoners, and they beat them, they attack them. They closed all the clinics inside the prisons, and this has caused serious health neglect inside the prisons. So far, 13 people died out of physical attack or health neglect policy inside the prisons. there is lots of torture, harassment, sexual violence, and sexual threats. This is reflected in the strip search policy that almost every prisoner now is subjected for this humiliating, degrading treatment of especially children and female and also men. And I think you also, the pictures that were shared in the social media for the naked prisoners and the harassment that they were subjected for. We documented lots of cases of physical attack where the prisoners were naked, and especially female prisoners, and they were still attacked by the police guards in these strip searches. Of course, we don't know much about the conditions of the prisoners from Gaza, and I'm sure Nariman will talk more about the petitions and the legal procedures, but I wanted to highlight that most of the information we documented are from people who were released from some of the military bases where these prisoners from Gaza were held, like Sdeiman and Anatot, and they were talking about even worse conditions and horrible conditions. The detainees are handcuffed 24 hours. They're blindfolded, they're sitting on the ground, forced to sit the whole day on their knees. They're interrogated and harassed, facing very poor food. Most of them lost lots of weight. They were attacked and not treated, attacked by dogs, security dogs. One of the old man, case 76 years old, he was telling me that the dog beated him in his hand and he wasn't treated properly. He suffered from the handcuffs that injured his hands, and he was released after 40 days without any legal procedures from the Sdeiman. I think there's lots of details to discuss about the prisoners' issues, but we can have questions and answer in more details. I wanted to end with really highlighting the need of the international pressure on the Israeli government, especially this government. Of course, most of these practices were happening even before. And the fact that it's continuing and escalating is just because of the lack of accountability, that they never paid any price for any of the crimes, the war crimes and the crimes against humanity that were used against prisoners. And now it's the time for accountability. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sahar. We'll move straight on to Nariman Zoabi. I do hope I've pronounced that right, from Adalah. Nariman holds an LLB in law and a BA in psychology from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and she serves as a lawyer at Adalah's Civil and Political Rights Department. She has coordinated Adalah's work on the surge of arrests for expression-related offences of Palestinian citizens in Israel. So, Nariman, over to you for 7 to 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much for organizing and attending this important session. And thank you, Sahar, for your presentation. I will primarily focus on legislations permitting incommunicado detention, overcrowding, and the severe deterioration of living conditions that Sahar addressed. Additionally, I will discuss how Israeli courts have approved these laws and the general oppressive tools used by the military and the Israeli prison system, IPS, against Palestinian detainees. Since October 7th, Israel has instated 3 ad hoc military detention camps. One is Ofer, the other one Anatot. They're both in the occupied West Bank, and Sdeiman in the south of Israel, close to Gaza. On October 7th, Israeli authorities revoked all permits for Palestinians from Gaza to stay in Israel and the West Bank. This action rendered thousands of Palestinians illegal infiltrators, stripping them of their basic rights. Many were then detained in horrific detentions in ad hoc military detention camps. Israeli courts have consistently denied habeas corpus petitions, demanding information as to where workers were being detained, under what law, and for how long. Among these petitions, at the end of October, 6 human rights organizations, including Adalah, filed an urgent petition with Israel's Supreme Court. The court dismissed the petition, failing to provide adequate remedy to incommunicado detention, which is prohibited under the international law. During this period, thousands of workers from Gaza endured weeks of incommunicado detention, subjected to inhuman and degrading treatment, as my colleague Sahar detailed. As documented by Human Rights Watch, one man described being stripped naked, photographed, beaten, and attacked by dogs, and at least 2 Palestinians workers who previously held work permits died in these facilities. Alongside Palestinians who had their permits revoked, hundreds more from Gaza were detained within Israel on October 7 and onwards, during the Israeli ground invasion and the coerced displacement of Palestinians from northern Gaza to the south. Approximately more than 800 are held in Israeli prison system facilities, while an unknown number, estimated in the hundreds, are in military camps, especially Sdeti Man. Among them are women and minors. Testimonies from released detainees paint a harrowing picture of systematic torture throughout the stages of arrest, detention, and interrogation, as my colleague Sahar detailed. According to a report published in Haaretz newspaper, 27 Palestinians have already died in these facilities. Considering the horrific conditions described by survivors, the number is likely an understatement. Palestinians apprehended from Gaza are sweepingly classified as unlawful combatants. This means that they are being held under a legal framework that allows prolonged incommunicado detention. The unlawful combatant law was first passed over 20 years ago. On December 18, 2023, the Israeli Knesset enacted Amendment number 4 to this law. This temporary order, initially effective for 4 months and now in a process of renewal, grants the military extensive powers. Under this amendment, individuals can be detained without an official arrest warrant for up to 45 days from their arrest, solely by the discretion of a military officer of a certain rank. Furthermore, it allows for the denial of judicial review for up to 75 days and denies access to legal counsel for up to 180 days, half a year almost. To illustrate the sweeping application of this legal framework, an 82-year-old Palestinian woman from Gaza who suffers from dementia was held in Israeli custody and explicitly classified as unlawful combatant. She was only released when a human rights organization petitioned an Israeli court demanding to visit her. Human rights organizations, including Adalah, are currently challenging the legality of this amendment. In a petition filed in mid-February, despite the extreme urgency of this situation, particularly in light of the reported 27 deaths already, the court has granted the state's request for an extension to respond to the petition until the beginning of April. This places these individuals in incommunicado detention, as the military deliberately withholds information regarding their identity and denies access to external visitors, including lawyers and the ICRC. Several petitions have been filed by human rights organizations demanding disclosure of the detainees' whereabouts, including petitions filed on behalf of the families of individuals detainees. However, the state has consistently refused to provide this information. In one instance, where it was leaked that the state intends to agree to provide the information to the ICRC, there was a backlash from the government officials, including Minister Ben-Gvir, who stated, "Over my dead body." The state upheld its previous stance that it is under no obligation regarding detainees from Gaza. This conduct amounts to enforced disappearance, which, when committed as part of a widespread or systematic attack against the civilian population, constitutes a crime against humanity. The Israeli legislators and courts have also been complicit in the systematic abuse and poor living condition in IPS facility, Israeli prison system. In early October, the Israeli Knesset passed a temporary order to the prison ordinance, which extendable by the government and has already been extended. This order allows the National Security Minister, Ben Gvir, to declare an emergency situation in prisons. This declaration permits those suspected or convicted of security offenses to be placed on mattresses on floor, among other measures that reduce their living space. This legislation contravenes past Supreme Court precedent and international standards regarding conditions in detention. On October 25, several human rights organizations, including Adalah, petitioned the Israeli Supreme Court challenging the conditions of detention of Palestinian detainees, including overcrowding, the denial of prisoners' right to communicate with lawyers, with their family, the cut of electricity and water, the prevention of medical treatment, and other forms of harsh treatment. The organizations emphasize that this policy constitutes a cruel punishment implemented with an absolute lack of transparency. The Supreme Court dismissed this petition on procedural ground, notably stating it is sweeping, directing the petitioners to file individual prisoners' petitions challenging their specific detention conditions. On the other hand, prisoners' petitions submitted to the district court in the name of individual prisoners with specific remedies are often denied. For instance, there was a petition submitted by Adalah requesting that detainee be provided with a winter jacket during the cold winter month. However, it took a full month for a hearing to be held, and ultimately the petition was dismissed. The Israeli prison service claimed that the detainee had already been provided with a jacket, although it took the detainee's lawyer almost an additional month to confirm this when finally granted permission to visit. The situation concerning all Palestinians held in Israeli prisons and detention facilities is deeply alarming, marked by unbearable living conditions and systematic abuse, torture, and ill treatment. The Israeli legislator has equipped authorities with extensive powers, and Israeli judicial authorities have consistently failed in their duty by repeatedly upholding the dire conditions faced by Palestinian detainees. This state of affairs is a direct result of the prolonged lack of accountability for severe human rights violations against Palestinians and the prevailing culture of impunity for the mistreatment and violence inflicted upon them. The urgency of the situation now demands immediate action from international community to bring an end to Israel's unchecked impunity and to prevent further harm to Palestinians who are currently at grave risk. Thank you.
Thank you, Nariman. Tommy's just handed over to me now as he's sort of traveling at the moment, but thank you for that really harrowing sort of presentation and of course from Sahar as well. Now handing over to a long-time colleague, Neil Salmons. And so Neil Salmons is War on Want senior campaigner on Palestine and previously worked with Medical Aid for Palestinians and Amnesty. Both Neil and I actually travelled together on a couple of occasions on parliamentary delegations to the West Bank, where we, just for context as well, which I think is also quite useful, visited the military courts, met with former and current detainees, and that I think formed quite a lot of the important aspects, I think, of some of the parliamentary delegations that Kabu have taken out with Medical Aid for Palestinians and with others, and I think remains quite a consistent key issue that we are addressing. So Neil, over to you.
Thank you, Joe, Tommy and all, and extra respect and thanks to Sahar and Nariman for making this event happen. I'm going to focus a bit more on the torture and ill treatment itself here. And if people can remember, I spent some 12 years working for Amnesty International in the Middle East section, and I have interviewed literally hundreds of survivors and victims of torture in Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Bahrain, Iraq, Turkey, in person and online. And that includes victim survivors of the US-led war on terror rendition program. And one of the really kind of striking reflections when I kind of read the reports and I listen to Zaha and Nariman, and if you've time to, to please look at the very credible reports, which I think Joe has just shared again here, of some of the authoritative investigations and reports of torture and abuse. These are really reminiscent of actually some of the worst years of the Syrian regime, both Bashar and Hafiz al-Assad, the CIA black sites, Abu Ghraib. And I really don't say that lightly. With Amnesty, we documented more than 30 methods of torture employed by the Syrian security forces. Israel is pretty close to that. Of course, it depends a little bit how you categorize things, but I'm going to go through about 8 of the kind of like key categories here. Severe beatings, in a way, they're kind of like simplest. You don't need any extra kind of tools or implements to do this, but you can also, as the Israelis do, sometimes use metal bars. But with your fists, they're feet and fists, very severe beatings take place, and they are believed to have led to 5 or more of the deaths in custody in the West Bank. Children are not spared from this, and more than half child detainees report that they suffer severe beatings, many of them leading to broken bones as well. It's said that some children returning to cells aren't even recognizable to people who are in the cell with them. There's exposure to the elements. We've seen, like, particularly in close to the Gaza area in the ad hoc camps, that detainees, including women, have been exposed in cages. That makes me think of ISIS and Guantanamo, exposed to the elements, very cold weather, the rain. Loud music can be blared at them. They're denied sleep, and all detainees pretty much are denied access to family visits, to lawyers, of course, to the ICRC has been banned, and to healthcare, a very serious restriction. The prolonged stress positions was mentioned, from perhaps 5 in the morning to midnight on their knees, often with the kind of near permanent handcuffs and blindfolds on, which should usually just be for very short periods of time if they're used appropriately. I'm not sure if it's the same 82-year-old woman who was mentioned, but there've been kind of online clips of I thought it was an 80-year-old woman who's got this quite severe scarring around her wrists, who'd been held for a while as such. It is Zaha. No exceptions there. Then humiliating treatment. So in addition, or perhaps separate to, being stripped and strip searches and so on, there's reports of guards urinating on detainees, giving them urine to drink, making them imitate animals physically and with noises, making them sing Israeli songs, perform some way in front of the Israeli flag. And if people refuse, they're beaten. Threats of execution, of rape to oneself, to one's family members. And indeed, in the UN experts report, it's recorded that at least 2 women have been raped. Many others have been subjected to sexual assault. Men too, but raped by a foreign object. Now, sorry for the detail here, but it's recorded that a hot metal instrument was inserted into the anus, that 1 man reportedly died as a result of his injuries. Another, many weeks later, injuries could still be seen on him. I don't know if it's exactly the same, but observers of Syria might know of something called Adalah Addameer, which is the black slave. Not a very good name. But this was an instrument of torture by the Syria regime over political prisoners in particular. And it appears that the Israeli forces have learnt from that. And then there's the kind of semi-creative forms of torture referred to, so, using attack or security dogs, using cigarettes stub onto the body, giving electric shocks. And yes, so children are not exempt, and these are long-standing concerns, as many will know. There was a UNICEF visit in 2013, which put tens of recommendations down what Israel needed to take forward. And if anything, well, I don't know if we can actually say it stepped back, but it's certainly not moved forward. In that time, almost nothing has been done. We see that most children are still kept for significant periods incommunicado, no visits by lawyers, family, no access to healthcare, as mentioned, severe beatings, and many say that their genitals were touched or beaten while they were detained. Of course, it's absolutely unacceptable for any state to be employing such torture and ill treatment against detainees. Torture is absolutely prohibited in every circumstance in international law. No state may derogate from this. So when we say that Israel is at the end of the spectrum on this, that's already at the end of an extremely bad spectrum. If a state were to be doing this, you should probably say, if we hadn't mentioned the perpetrating state here, that this should be a pariah state, not a close ally of the UK, not one who we as the UK should be affording a human rights-based free trade agreement with, one we should be continuing to provide with arms, one we should continue to allow our companies to invest in companies working in the occupied territories, in the settlements, one from whom we continue to import goods from businesses operating in the settlements. And going back to the children, remember that so many children are arrested close to settlements, and that the detention and ill treatment of children often begins close to the settlements themselves. Okay, thanks very much. I'll pause there.
Thank you, Neil. And obviously thank you for that sort of really, really grotesque and harrowing account of what is happening. I don't know whether other colleagues on this call have any questions. I suppose I would start with one, and I know that others have already touched on, but in terms of what would your demands be of parliamentarians in terms of what should they be saying, demanding, asking for, or raising with regards to what obviously the three of you have all sort of outlined to us just now. And then maybe actually, I mean, Richard, do you want to come in now as well? Perhaps on that, with your question too.
Okay. Thanks, Joe, and thanks all three of you for that briefing. Very harrowing, very concerning, but it's really important that we do hear it. My question really is about your ability to work in the current situation as NGOs defending prisoners. Clearly there was repression against NGOs well before October the 7th, but I just wonder if you could tell us a bit about what is happening to you since October the 7th. And I mean, clearly there's a lot of obstacles being put in your way in terms of doing your job to defend prisoners and represent prisoners. But I just wonder what action is being taken, if any, against your very ability to operate.
Thanks, Richard. I don't know who wants to begin there. Sahad, perhaps you want to start?
Yes, so I totally echo what Niall was saying about the role of the MPs and in the question of sanctions and divestment and forcing. I think one of the most powerful tools of the international law, especially when the state is not respecting its obligation according to international law, and in this case, the torture is absolutely prohibited, even in the worst war that any state can have. And Israel is violating this standard systematically for decades now without any accountability. So the minimum is to try and to find Israel accountable for these crimes via the sanctions like military embargo, divesting from settlements, businesses, and other businesses that are profiting from the occupation. So this is, of course, much needed. And I think it's not just helpful in the case in stopping torture and violations against prisoners, because we should see the issue of the prisoners totally connected with the occupation, with the other general policy of annexation and maintaining the apartheid regime over the Palestinian people. And this is why sanctions is essential in this time. For the second question about the work of the organizations, and here, like in the case of Addameer, of course, you all aware that we were designated. So actually, it's still continuing. And this has forced us for some, since the designation, to split the work. So the legal work that we're implementing is done by colleagues, lawyers, that they act as private lawyers. So it's not affecting directly, let's say, because we are not able to visit as an organization. We are not able to petition the High Court, like as Nariman said, jointly with the other colleagues, the Israeli organizations, because we were designated. Some of the donors after the 7th of October freezed and ended their support for the Palestinian, not just for the 7 organizations that were designated, but for more wider group of Palestinian organizations. Of course, some of the colleagues would be banned travel from outside the country. It should be highlighted, in addition with all what me and Neil and Nariman were describing about the practices, the fact of that the army is confiscating, or let me say, stealing property and money from prisoners and families of prisoners, or anyone that he used to be an ex-prisoner. So some of our colleagues or board members or General Assembly members that they were themselves ex-prisoners in the past were facing now, like without any accusation that currently they are associated with any crime or with any activity, they raided their houses, they confiscated money and so on. And this is affecting lots of other family members and ex-detainees.
Thanks, Sahar. Nariman, do you want to go next?
Thank you for these questions, and obviously Sahar covered most of the answers when we're speaking about what is needed. First of all, our first goal is a call to end the torture and to provide access to international bodies such as ICRC to visit these IPS facilities, and to review, to look closer at what is really happening. Hopefully, that will help in changing the horrible reality that we are describing through testimonies of released prisoners. And this also brings me to the second question. When describing our work as lawyers, sometimes we wait for prolonged periods in order to get the chance to visit the prisoners we represent. We are working in a hostile environment, either when working in front of the IPS facilities or in front of the AG or the court itself. I've heard testimonies of lawyers being checked through their papers before entering the IPS facilities and invading their privacy in contradiction with the law and the regulations. So the hostile environment also affects our ability to fulfill our work as human rights defenders, as lawyer representing prisoners in horrible conditions. And on the same time, our petitions to courts are not that effective as they should be, since the judicial system is somehow complicit with this inadequate treatment of prisoners, and not balancing the authorities and putting to an end many of the practices against the prisoners.
Thanks, Nariman. Neil, do you have anything to add to those two questions?
Just if people haven't already seen the little kind of briefing we put together, but first and foremost, I think like that the UK government should be condemning publicly these very well-founded reports. It should be demanding publicly that there's unfettered access for lawyers, ICRC, independent monitors, and so on. It could be demanding to know what steps the Israelis are taking to end these practices. And it should be demanding that there is an end to impunity. I mean, all of us who watch Palestine, Israel know, I mean, not only Israel, but Israel is very well placed for this. It kind of luxuriates in impunity. There are very few perpetrators who are ever held to account, or anyone who ever orders or allows such abuses to take place. And yes, children should never be subjected to military arrest, detention, and so on. So they should be released from military detention immediately. Yeah, I think, I mean, we as an organization, we face certain threats. We receive complaints and are alleged to be anti-Semites, etc. I think that's kind of across the board, and we don't really have the time to take that on seriously here.
Thanks, Neil. Andy, question from you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joe. Not Joe. Neil has kind of covered what I was going to say about the way that we ought to be using accountability, and perhaps I think it would be the International Criminal Court ought to start naming people and possibly dissuade other perpetrators from carrying this on. But the other thing I wanted to say was that I suspect most of us know about the Stanford prison experiment. Is that probably true? That, you know, the basic essence is that if you put people in a position of absolute power over people who are incarcerated, it's a very dangerous thing to do. It unleashes a lot of sadistic behavior. And that what's happened in Israel is that very important people have actually, far from preventing that happening, they've actually stoked it up and really given the green light to serious abuses. I take Sahara's point that the ill treatment of Palestinians has been going on for a very long time, but I think the evidence is that during this war, things have got a great deal worse, because the entitlement that people, once people get overtaken by hatred and fear, they seem to have, it entitles them to unleash their sadistic behavior on the people they've captured. That isn't there a chance that the international courts could hold the people at the top, the Ben-Gvirs and people like that, liable for stimulating the idea that torturing Palestinians is all right because they're not really, you know, quite people, they're just something else? I don't know if that's a coherent question, actually, but it's really about how the threat of, and as I say, Neil did cover this point, the threat of actual prosecution at the end of this could be used to try and, I mean, it would be nice if we could get the Israelis to understand that actually they really need to be a bit nicer people, you know, rather than just fearful of prosecution. But if that's all that will stop them, could that be used more?
Thanks, Andy. I think just adding to that, I think, I suppose, in terms of, I mean, in that link that we've also has been shared. I mean, there's that sort of one quote from Ben-Gvir, who obviously oversees the Israeli prison service, who said, we need to remember that our prison guards are dealing with the scum of the earth, murderers who pose a security threat. I think, obviously, we're under no illusion that these things have happened, sort of since he has come on the scene. But I think it'd be interesting to hear from you in terms of, has there been with this also this dehumanizing rhetoric that we see, obviously, about Palestinians in the West Bank, but also Palestinians in Gaza as well, and across the board. How is that impacting in terms of the issues that we're discussing today, in terms of that constant dehumanization of Palestinians from Israeli officials, but also you see it in terms of whether it be TikTok or Instagram videos posted by Israeli soldiers in Gaza, or you see it from Israeli rappers, you see it from Israeli TikTok influencers, or that kind of thing. And I mean, how is all that, I think, fitting in with with the issues in terms of detention and incarceration, and how actually this is being viewed by wider Israeli society as well? I don't know if that was quite coherent either, but whoever wants to lead on that.
I think that the dehumanization against prisoners also have a long history, because in the past, several soldiers were taking photos of prisoners, sharing them in their social media, not in the same intensity that we see now or that happens in Gaza. But it happened in the past. The dehumanization as well is very well reflected with the policies of the prison authority, the treatment over the years. But definitely, when Ben-Gvir became a minister, it became on another scale, because immediately when he took the office, and it was very clear, because Ben-Gvir was attacking the prisoners and families of prisoners. He was attacking buses of the families of prisoners coming into Israel to visit, even much before he became a minister. He was always highlighting the issue of prisoners as terrorist people, that they don't deserve any rights from the state. So when he took over the position, he immediately started to cancel some of the rights of the prisoners inside the Israeli system, on the level of the visitation, the canteen, the hygiene stuff, the conditions of the daily life of the prisoners. And now, after the war, he's taking the opportunity till the end, I would say. He's not he's using every opportunity he have, whether according to the law or according to the regulations, in order to make their life more and more difficult. And of course, it's accepted internally, because what you described, Joseph, that there is an increase in general in all levels in the dehumanization of Palestinians. And this is also explains all the attack by the Israeli police against students in the Israeli universities, against teachers, physicians. Hundreds of Palestinians, citizens of the state, were arrested, investigated, or harassed, or facing disciplinary measures, because they shared to show sympathy with Palestinians in Gaza after the war. So this explains the level of change we are facing on the attitude and the behavior of the whole community. Just to reflect on the ICC issue, Unfortunately, this is what we were demanding the prosecutor for years now, that he should take the issue of the torture and the arbitrary detention seriously. Unfortunately, the previous decision on the ICC didn't include the issue of the prisoners in the investigation. But we, the organizations dealing with prisoners, kept communicating and trying to push the current prosecutor to include the prisoners issue. And I think and I hope that now it's more visible than ever that he should take measures after the war. And I mean the serious deterioration and the fact that so many people died. Actually, it's not precedented before that in such a short period, lots of prisoners lost their life inside the Israeli prison out of these practices, which means there is an urgency in the prosecutor in the ICC in interfering and issuing warrant arrests in order to cause for a change in the policy inside the Israeli prison system.
I may want to reflect on the question that Joseph just asked, and I want to agree with everything that Sahar said and elaborate that even in the coalition agreements for this government, you can see the agenda of Ben-Gvir toward prisons. He had a very clear agenda on what he is going to do with security prisoners. He always called them as privileged and threatened that he's gonna take away all the privileges he had. Some called him the menu president because he was also so busy with the food provided to the prisoners, alleging that they have a lot more than they deserve food within the prison, and it's all before the 7th of October. And about the dehumanizing part, I even would have say that it's not only dehumanizing, but it's even up to criminal offenses that are being now doing, especially from extreme right-wing Jews, but also other Israeli Jews that are being unpunished. There are direct calls for the harm of Palestinians, and it is not addressed by the AG. This is something that Adalah issued a letter about a few weeks ago to the Attorney General about its policy and giving a green line to this incitement against Palestinians, Israeli citizens of Israel and from the OPT and Gaza that are being not punished and allowed by the state's authority, putting the lives of Palestinians in danger. And on the other side, we see all the arrest, interrogations of Palestinians for their freedom of expression, for expressing any solidarity with the people of Gaza, or even posting a verse of Quran on their social media. They are being arrested, detained, indicted with counterterrorism law, specifically Article 24, inciting to terrorism and identifying with terrorism. And it shows the double standards even by the AG, the Attorney General of Israel, regarding these statements.
Can I jump in too on combining Joseph and Andy's questions? I think our own ministers here have let everyone down when they refused to take the opportunities when specifically asked if they would condemn dehumanizing statements. They did not do so. And while unfortunately it's the case that the Vienna Declaration and other diplomatic protocols, I understand it, essentially would prevent the UK state from arresting any visiting senior politician on account of their potential dehumanizing statements, even genocidal calls. They should still be condemning these publicly. And by having not done so for most of the time, I think they are extra complicit in this. Also, when you have the Prime Minister, the President, the Minister of Defense, and so many cabinet members saying that there are no civilians, that everyone is guilty, etc., then you're setting up your security forces to do whatever they want. And I think the imagery, which I find completely bizarre, so many images of Israeli military security personnel seemingly delightfully happy as they carry out abuse and take pictures of themselves and their colleagues doing it. It's almost unprecedented. It's very much a kind of Abu Ghraib image. So one other point I wanted to say is regarding the ICJ. So you know that to cause severe or serious bodily and or mental harm to such a group, national group such as the Palestinians of Gaza, is one of the charges effectively under the South Africa case. And what it comes in, what it's referenced, there's several examples and patterns given in the 84-page submission from South Africa. It wasn't kind of commented on, but in any length by the judges themselves. But clearly what we have here is a pattern of such abuse, very well evidenced, which could indeed be part of the ongoing deliberations of the judges of the ICJ. And while the UK government has been a little bit ambivalent about the International Court of Justice, I think we will see that will be one of the best places where we will finally see some accountability come to bear.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you to Sahar and Nariman. I think probably, I mean, all of your contributions have been so valuable today, and only sorry that we didn't have more parliamentarians here, but we will have a recording of this, and we will be sharing it with those that were unable to come, partly because of the urgent question that was had in Parliament on Gaza. We'll also be looking at sort of questions that we can put down and ways in which I know Neil we'll probably have a discussion after this in terms of what we can be doing to further get a lot of these messages that all three of you have stated across. Thank you for all your contributions. They were obviously informative and important, but also harrowing and grotesque. And I think some of the things you said are deeply troubling and sickening, and I'm still kind of actually processing some of the things that you actually have communicated to us this afternoon. Just thank you very much, and thank you for your continued work on this issue, and obviously we will support and help in any ways that we can. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you all for making this happen.